election integrity, the future of the Farm Bill and the ongoing government shutdown, and America's talking. This is the Center Square Daily for Thursday, February 19th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Thanks for carving out part of your day with us today. Well, election integrity continuing to be a major focus in this election year as states across the country have early voting underway for primaries. You have the November 3rd general midterm election that's going to garner a lot of attention. But will there be some changes to federal election law down the pipe? Well, it's a question that's being posed, obviously, with the House passing several measures requiring voter ID and other issues and initiatives Republicans call election integrity. You have Democrats pushing back, saying that it's going to try to keep people from getting to the polls. Well, yesterday, during the celebration for Black History Month at the White House, President Donald Trump stood next to an ally who pushed for more election integrity.
I say this because this is the greatest country on the planet. American citizens should decide American election. Vote for the SAVE Act.
Thank you. Leo 2.0. We love Leo. Thank you, Leo. That was very good.
Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, yesterday taking questions from reporters, doubled down on the president's policy of ensuring there's election integrity with voter ID laws.
This is a common sense policy that nearly 90% of the country agrees with. You need an ID to go and purchase alcohol. You need an ID to go to the library and check out a book. And so the president thinks you should have an ID to vote in our nation's elections. And I know the vast majority of Americans agree with him on that. And he wants Congress to move quickly to get it done.
A lot of the debates have been around the possibility of impeding upon people who need to get a certain type of identification in order to show for voting or registering to vote. And a lot of the issues stem around the questions of an individual's status as an immigrant or a non-citizen. And how do you ensure that those voter rolls are cleaned of non-citizens? These are all questions being posed and debated, but the House measure now into the Senate, unclear what's going to happen. And that would just regulate federal elections. And there was a lot of controversy down in Georgia in the 2020 election and also in other elections and voter ID laws that they have there. Well, the Center Square's Kim Jarrett interviewed Georgia Secretary Brad Raffensperger, who's also running for governor in Georgia. And he says that Georgia's voter ID laws are actually helping boost voter integrity and confidence in elections.
In Georgia, over 95% of all Georgians, have photo ID. And right now, Georgia is recognized as having the most secure and safe elections in America. It's never decreased turnout, but it's made sure that we had the right amount of voter identification so people had trust in it.
Now, again, Georgia has very strict voter ID laws. They are one of many states, most of the country, that has some form of voter ID. More than 30 states have voter ID laws, and about a dozen or so do not. They have different types of verification checks, but Republicans in Congress looking to get the SAVE Act through the final passage so that they can have uniformity when it comes to federal election integrity. Now, Kansas, another state that has strict voter ID laws, but there was a measure in the Kansas House that was being criticized because it was looking to expand early voting.
As a conservative Republican who worked in the Secretary of State's office under Chris Kobach, I will not compromise on election integrity. This weak-kneed reform is an outright betrayal of the core Republican values, sabotaging election integrity by extending early voting flies in the face of the Trump administration's ironclad push for secure same-day voting. If we want real election reform, we must require proof of citizenship, switch to hand-counted paper ballots, and declare Election Day as Election Day. Kansans deserve legislation that won't compromise the integrity of our elections. We must secure our elections like our republic depends on it, because it does.
So while Kansas does have strict voter ID laws, there's concern there that expanding early voting could diminish election integrity and trust in the ballot. We'll be watching what happens with that measure out of Congress as the U.S. Senate looks to possibly take that up sometime, but there's plenty of other things going on or maybe not going on in Congress. Let's talk now with the Center Square, Washington, D.C. reporter, Therese Boudreaux. Therese, thanks for taking time with us. You are watching all things going on. It's been kind of quiet lately, but we do have a new farm bill that's being proposed. Tell us about it.
Yeah, that's right. So the Farm Bill, which is a very large piece of legislation, which essentially reauthorizes and lays out funding for different all things related to agriculture, really everything from nutrition programs to crop insurance to even different trade policy. So usually those bills have about a 5-year span, but the last one that Congress did was in 2018. So that and that's 7 years ago. So it's been a long time coming, or more than that actually. And so the right now there's a lot of stuff going on in Congress, especially with regards to funding DHS. So it's just been dropped, and then the committees will take it up and mark it up in February coming up. So a lot of it's supposed to be bipartisan. It is mostly bipartisan, but a lot of Democrats are coming out against it because, for one thing, one of the major things is that it doesn't undo the SNAP changes and SNAP cuts in the one big beautiful bill. That's something that the Farm Bill could have reversed. Again, it's in draft form, so who knows, it may change. But so Democrats are really unhappy about that. And then Democrats and others, some even in the Make America Healthy Again movement, are concerned about changes to law. It was related to pesticides. So they're saying that these changes would essentially make it much harder for people to sue pesticide companies for damages or harms that they sustained from using those pesticides. So it's kind of complicated. It essentially makes it so that there is a national federal standard for safety labeling. So states can't make their own standards. And so that makes it much harder if, let's say, the national standard says, these are the only warnings that we have, or maybe it doesn't have warnings at all. If there's nothing on there that says anything about cancer, for instance, and you have a lot of people in, let's say, Kansas who say, I think that this pesticide caused me cancer, and so, we want to have a class action lawsuit, they can't do that anymore if that provision passes. So again, most of the bill is bipartisan, things like crop insurance and farm loans and things like that. That's something that is really no one's against. But there are some things in it that might make it difficult to pass.
And the kind of traditional farm bill issues, like you said, crop insurance, risk management, loans, energy grants, forest management, and so on. But it's really, I think, the sticking points are what you raised there. It's got some other elements in there, like scaling back that regulatory hurdle for pesticide manufacturers. But it also, restricts federal funding for solar farm projects and some other issues that's drawing some controversy.
Yes, that's correct. So there are some other things like that. Obviously, Democrats and under the Biden administration are very supportive of renewable energy sources, like energy coming from wind, from solar. And in the past, even just 5 years, we've seen a lot of farmland and forest land be used for solar, quote unquote, farms instead, where you just have these mass fields of solar panels. And so Democrats or Republicans, excuse me, don't think that that's a good use of prime farmland and forest land. And so some of the changes in this draft bill would make it so that it would limit federal funding for such projects and other things that essentially would just make it a little bit more difficult to support those projects. So that's also something that certain environmentalists and Democrats don't like. But again, that is almost one of the more minor things, because SNAP in particular is something that Democrats are very concerned about. So I would not be surprised if that holds up a lot of Democratic votes. Things like the reduced solar funding, it's possible that compromises can be worked out.
Of course, all of this happening as Congress is dealing with a ongoing partial government shutdown. You got DHS funding that's up in the air. It's lapsed. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? Are we going to have any resolution to a partial government shutdown?
Yeah, so we're almost a week into that partial government shutdown now. It's nothing like the record-long 43-day one that we had last October and November, because this shutdown only affects DHS. Because the Homeland Security bill that funds DHS, it's the only annual federal appropriations bill that hasn't passed. And the reason why it's not passing is because Democrats are very staunchly holding to 10 or 17, depending on how you count them, reforms and restrictions that they want to put on immigrations and customs enforcement officers. A lot of that blew up after the second shooting of an American citizen in the Minneapolis protests in January. And so there's really been a stalemate that's been very difficult for lawmakers to get out of, because Republicans are saying, okay, fine, we're fine with, for instance, mandating body cameras on officers. But things that Democrats really want, such as requiring federal immigration enforcement officers to get a judicial warrant on top of the immigration court warrant that they already have to get to enter private property and arrest somebody who's in the country illegally. Republicans are saying that's untenable. You're essentially just going to cripple ICE agents, and they won't be able to do their jobs. So again, and there are other things too that Republicans don't want, that Democrats are really pushing for, like masks coming off of agents. Republicans are saying, well, if you take the masks off, then people could dox them or try to hunt them down, or there could be retaliations. So it's all up in the air right now. There have reportedly been negotiations going on between the White House and Democratic leaders, but we really haven't seen a lot of details on that. And again, we're almost a week into this shutdown. Now, ironically, this shutdown doesn't actually scale back on any ICE or immigration enforcement activities at all, because unlike FEMA and TSA and the Coast Guard and Secret Service and all of these agencies that are also in DHS and are impacted by the shutdown, ICE already has a whole bunch of funding, because Republicans won Big Beautiful Bill, which, as you remember, passed in July, that gave them $75 billion. Now, for reference, the funding that was in the Homeland Security bill that hasn't passed yet for ICE, the ICE funding that they had in there was $10 billion. So they're set for essentially the rest of the Trump administration. I mean, assuming they don't, blow all of that spending at once. So they're still easily doing their jobs. And there are the other agencies like Federal Disaster Management and Secret Service. Most of their activities, or many of them, are considered essential. So they're essentially just having their employees work without pay. So that's why Americans aren't really feeling any impacts of it yet. And also
at this point, right? I mean, because the last shutdown, there was considerable time before we actually started seeing those true impacts. I mean, it was weeks before there were concerns about the TSA, for instance, and TSA officers who, they were showing up to the job for several weeks, not getting paid, but then, they're not getting a paycheck. They feel, why not? I'll just call in sick. So do you think we're going to get to that point where that pressure is going to build, especially when it comes to getting through an airport safely, that's going to be the linchpin, so to speak?
Right. Well, honestly, with this Congress and in this second Trump administration, it's really hard to tell how recalcitrant Democrats will be with this, particularly since they showed with the previous shutdown that they're willing to have things happen that impact the American people that are negative in order to make a political point or to stick by their ideals and to make sure that something that they want happen. But shutdowns rarely accomplish that. And like I said, it's not even accomplishing anything even now. It would take a couple of weeks, I believe, for TSA officers to miss their next paycheck. As we saw in the last shutdown, we really only saw the mass delays and cancellations of flights once TSA officers missed a second paycheck, because they have to support their families. They're missing 2 paychecks. How are they going to pay their rent, their mortgages, groceries, etc.? So obviously, that is not an ideal situation to where this drags out for weeks or more. And I don't think anybody wants that. But again, who really knows with this Congress, because there's just so much partisan rhetoric and activity going on that it's really hard to predict.
Especially in an election year with everything that's at stake, the control of Congress, the slim margins in the House, and on it goes. Therese, real quick, though, We talked about the voter ID law that House passed. Any word on when the Senate could take that up?
Well, Thune has indicated openness to taking that up. Again, there's a lot going on right now, so there's no set date scheduled for it yet. But Republicans, almost every day, it seems like, including today, there's a lot of Senate Republicans who are pushing for the Senate to take it up. And not only to take it up, but they realize that with the filibuster, there's no way it's going to pass because Democrats are, almost all of them are very much against that. So they, as they've called for before, want Thune to tweak the rules of the filibuster. Right now, they're asking for him to implement a standing filibuster, which essentially means that lawmakers who are against it would just have to keep talking in order to stall the bill, keep talking on the floor. And they think that's the only way it's going to get passed, which is probably true. So even though that's causing a lot of talk in the media, Thune and there are a lot of other lawmakers, Republicans and Democrats, don't really want to change the filibuster because, again, once you do that, that could have political repercussions for you in the next administration. So we're watching that, obviously, and we'll be covering that at the Center Square. But it would not be surprising if it fails in the Senate because Thune is unwilling to change the filibuster. But we'll see.
It's a priority that the president has, especially in an election year heading into the November election. Will that happen? We'll be watching. Therese Boudreaux, Center Square reporter for Washington, D.C. Greatly appreciate your time as always.
Thank you.
Now it's time for America's Talking with clips from state houses across the country. And we'll start in Illinois, where Governor J.B. Pritzker delivered a State of the State and budget address to legislators collected at the state capitol in Springfield. He proposed a slightly smaller budget than the one he currently has in place, about $54 billion, but that's still about $14 billion more than when he took office. Now, the governor, a reflection of maybe some criticism he received from his speech last year, where he used the word Nazi 6 times in referencing the Trump administration, the governor took a different tone yesterday.
Love is a superpower. It teaches the brittle to bend. It shows the selfish how to share. It grants courage to the coward. Once sparked, love becomes momentum. It's the sled gathering speed down the hill. It's the drop of water as it tips over the falls. It's glitter out of a bottle.
Well, I think like we discussed before this, you walk out and say, well, at least we weren't called Nazis. That's a positive step. The love stuff was interesting and weird. And I mean, just the whole thing about the speech was about his run for president.
Now, it's long been speculated that Governor J.B. Pritzker is vying to run for the White House. He was even considered a VP potential for Kamala Harris in 2024, not making that cut. But we'll see exactly what transpires after the November election if the governor does indeed toss his hat into the ring. But he's also running for re-election for a third term for Illinois governor. So part of his budget speech didn't necessarily lay out all the details of the budget, but he did propose a new tax increase.
I propose a social media platform fee that will generate $200 million per year to support K-12 education. Parents and kids deserve to have better funded schools. And if social media giants are going to feed off of Illinois families, they ought to support Illinois families.
We didn't have much discussion about the actual budget in the budget address today, but we've already uncovered a TikTok tax on social media, tax and fee increases for casinos, and then a robbing of the local government distributive fund, meaning fewer dollars going to our local governments. And when we put pressure on those local governments, it sends property taxes going up.
Republicans at the Illinois State House very critical of the Democrat majority not doing anything to address that state's highest in the nation property taxes. But the governor's speech, as it was happening at the same time, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt held a press briefing, and she was asked about a different policy from Governor J.B. Pritzker, but instead of addressing that directly, Leavitt just directed criticism at Pritzker's management of the states with crime, waste, and fraud.
The president certainly thinks that Governor Pritzker is not doing a very good job of managing his state, as evidenced by not only the waste, fraud, and abuse, but also the crime in the city of Chicago that unfortunately Governor Pritzker has refused to pick up the phone and call the White House and ask for help on, which is something his residents want him to do, but he refuses to do for political reasons.
Now, the ongoing conversation about waste, fraud, and abuse, also a major focus in Minnesota, where there's been ongoing hearings, even in the halls of Congress, on ongoing fraud concerns. There was an interesting exchange with one legislator, the inspector general, having a conversation about fraud.
Inspector General, I think he's talking about the alleged fraud. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, member.
No, excuse me, Madam Chair. I was not talking about the alleged fraud. I didn't say the word alleged.
The Inspector General can speak to what he can speak to regarding ongoing investigations.
Yes, we've been, since December, we have been doing an increased number of compliance visits. And so we've been out in January, we went to the 100 largest centers by CCAP revenue and collected a sample of attendance records from every one of them. And we're in the process of reviewing those records. We went out in February again and went to some additional centers and then went to family child care providers who were the largest recipients and some other programs that were identified in some of our data analysis as red flag indicators. And we will continue to do that in March.
I don't think that the question of fraud in Minnesota's child care network is going to go away anytime soon, as, again, Congress has been focusing on that quite a bit. Interesting to see how the State House in Minnesota is also reacting to that ongoing story. Not just in Minnesota, where fraud is a concern. In Washington State, they have concerns about the private Medicare industry and potential fraud there.
The Department of Health and Human Services Inspector General, academic researchers, and investigative journalists have uncovered wide-ranging fraudulent practices within the private Medicare industry by upcoding, overpayments, delaying medically necessary care, and denial of claims by insurers. And this fraud, in their estimation, ranges from anywhere between $75 billion annually and $140 billion annually. Now imagine what we could do to improve our health care if we just eliminated that fraud.
And it seems to crystallize one of the major issues and reasons why there's been so much focus on going after fraud, because of those dollars being wasted, and it could go to help those who truly need those dollars. Again, that debate is going to continue across the country in state houses, and that is America's Talking right here with the Center Square. From my studio in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop, and join us back here Friday to wrap up the week with more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from all across the country, only with the Center Square Daily.